observatory really starts with this fellow. He's a Catholic priest who had a telescope on the roof of the Church of St. Ignatius, which is kind of interesting because the church was built, originally they were going to put a dome, and they ran out of money. So they had these big 4 pillars with no dome on top of them. So he put his little telescopes on top of the pillars. And in the 1850s and 60s, he started doing astronomy there, but he did something new that no one had done before. Rather than trying to measure the position of stars, which is what you do if you're doing timekeeping or navigation, the reasons that people used to do astronomy, he put a prism in front of the lens and turned every star into a rainbow. And by seeing the relative brightnesses of the different colors and the places where suddenly a color was missing, he was able to tell what the stars were made out of. So he changed the entire idea of astronomy from where are the stars to what are the stars, and ultimately working out the evolution of stars. He invented astrophysics. And in the 1930s, this equipment here shows the equipment that we had at the Vatican Observatory to make an atlas of the line so that every element has its own line, and with this equipment we were able to measure the lines of the different elements. All of that happening by priests here at the Vatican. In 1870, while Secchi was still alive, in 1870, Garibaldi conquers Rome, and the Pope flees to the Vatican itself. And at that point, the Vatican insists it's still independent. Italy refuses to admit it. There's a great fight one way or the other. About 20 years later, 1890, 1891, this Pope, who was Leo XIII, is talked to by this fellow, who's a priest named Denza, who had been an assistant to Father Secchi. Secchi's been dead 15 years at this point. And Denza says, if you want to be known as a nation, start a national observatory. And we've got this wonderful project that we can be part of, where there are 18 nations in the world that are each going to photograph a different part of the sky. The Italy will have one part, the Vatican will have a different part, and it shows that the Vatican is independent. So they got this telescope, and Father Leis was the one who was in charge of making a photograph of each region of the sky, and they were going to put it all together to make a giant map of the sky. Not only are they mapping the sky, but they will use the photographs to measure the positions of every star. So here's an example of one of the photographs. And the measurement was done by these 3 nuns, sisters of the Child Mary. Actually, there are 4 of them all together who did the work. From 1910 to 1921, they measured about 500,000 stars. And incidentally, all of them now have asteroids named for them because the work they did was so spectacular. So it was ironic, even though Secchi works to say, no, we're going to take what are the stars, not where are the stars, the first work of the observatory was still, where are the stars? And if we follow down the hallway here, we can see this is a building that's on top of the Vatican Library now in the Vatican Museum. It's called the Tower of the Winds, but they had a telescope there and offices on the wall of the Vatican itself. And you can see here a telescope dome on one of these towers. Father Hagen, who came here, was the first Jesuit, member of the Jesuit order. And since the 1930s, all the astronomers at the observatory are members of the Jesuit order. So this is what the Vatican looked like around 1925. There's St. Peter's, of course. And you can see this wall, and there's a telescope there, and a telescope there, and a telescope there, and other equipment along here. That's where the astronomers had their observatory. 1929, Mussolini and the Pope make an agreement that the Vatican city-state is now recognized by Italy as an independent country, and the territories that the Vatican used to have are given back to the Vatican, including these gardens where we are right now. So we actually wind up going to the Papal Palace. This is what the palace looks like. And inside is that laboratory I was telling you about where they're measuring the spectra of pure metals. This is one of the rooms in the Papal Palace. And they put telescopes on the roof of the Papal Palace. And from 1930 until 2009, that was the headquarters of the Vatican Observatory. But we're all part of these gardens that's 2 kilometers long, half a kilometer wide. This was Vatican territory. It was neutral territory during the war. So this is where refugees came, and they had more than 12,000 refugees from the wars living in the gardens, including living in our telescopes. So they were very important in taking care of the refugees. After the war, we built a new telescope in the gardens. This modern telescope, we had our first computer in that telescope dome, and it was there that Pope Paul VI watched the moon landing. So that was our history up through about 1970. Again, with this picture here, I'll show you the different people. That was the fellow who reformed the calendar, Pope Gregory, who was the first person to hire astronomers, Angelo Secchi, who made these spectra, Pope Leo, who established the observatory, and Pope Pius XI, who moved us up to Cascadon Alpha. Now, as you can see, we went down the hallway, and there's offices up and down the hallway. But follow me, because there's something else we have wonderfully here in this headquarters. Remember, I described all those telescopes and the photographs they took. What happened to those photographs? They are here. The plates dating back to the 1890s are all still preserved here. Photographic glass plates. And we've done a scanning of those plates so that if you need to, you can actually look at the digital versions.
Yeah.
That's something of our history. We'll end there. So this is just, of interest to me. This was the meeting, maybe the 4th meeting of the International Astronomical Union, founded after World War I. Astronomers from all over the world who would meet together. You notice in those days, most of them are men, but there are some women in the group. This was held at Harvard College in Cambridge, Massachusetts, at the Harvard College Observatory. And this fellow here with the hat and the scowl, his name was Harlow Shapley. He was one of the guys who worked out the nature of galaxies and that they were island universes. He was the director of the observatory. In front of him was his daughter, Mildred, who was 16 at the time. Mildred wound up at the University of Arizona when I was a student, and she was the editor of my first scientific paper. She lived to be 100. Also in this picture right there is George Lemaitre. Now the other scary thing, this picture was taken at Harvard in 1932. So from 1932 to 1978 is 54 years, right?
Yes.
In 1978, I started as a postdoctoral fellow there until 1980. From 1980 to now is 44 years. So my time there was halfway back to when this picture was taken. Makes me feel very old that I know people who are in this picture. So this was the book by Father Clavius after the reform of the calendar that explained the formula used to determine the date of Easter, and then he generated the dates of Easter all the way until the year 5000. We have it open to the page where you can see where it's going to be in the 2024, 2025, 2026. We have a copy from the Vatican's library of the Copernicus book, a couple of volumes of the Philosophical Transactions of the Royal Society that have papers by Isaac Newton. This one is about optics. This one over here is his description of this new kind of telescope he's invented, which we now call the Newtonian telescope. Letters of René Descartes, a description of Tycho Brahe of the new nova, basically the supernova he discovered. And then this book, we kind of like here because this was 1617. It was a book about the sun that was a rival to what Galileo did, actually better than Galileo. And as a result, Galileo was very jealous and he got mad at the Jesuits after that. We have in this room also a plaque because we moved from the Papal Palace out here for a little more space in 2009. So that's when Pope Benedict came. This is him holding a Martian meteorite from our meteorite collection. And you can see me in that picture, that's my arm right there. That's a view from the telescopes on the roof of the Papal Palace, and this is a view from the telescopes in Arizona. That's our telescope there. So we've got two locations now. We do telescope astronomy and research. There we also do meteorite work, historical work, work with the plates, and theoretical work as well from here.
Can I ask a question?
Sure.
Why do you think people they're so interested about, because I've been asking all this conference about the extraterrestrial. I don't think I've escaped from this question.
We can't either. I actually wrote a book.
But why? Why is this taught? That's what don't get me.
I'll give you an answer that I heard from a wonderful science fiction writer since passed, Terry Pratchett.
Mm-hmm.
And he described a cartoon, remember the Far Side cartoon? Yeah. And he describes a cartoon, a picture, where there's an automobile rushing down the city and the UFOs are landing and there's, construction and all sorts of confusion and people are screaming and running and there's a car going down and there's a dog with his head out the door. And he misses all of that. He's looking out the window at another dog. Dogs want to see other dogs. People want to see other people. It's the same thing as, when you were a baby and you first discovered there were other babies. It's something about just the social nature of we human beings. We want to know that we're not alone. Are there? I don't know. We haven't found any yet. But, I'm not going to tell God what he can make or not make.
One more question, because you're an astronomer. I was asked last night, why was the need of such a vast universe? Mm-hmm. They asked me, why God has to make so big universe. Then I would discover that is more and more. And I said, God didn't tell me. I don't have a connection with him, but there are certain things that
it reflects God's nature. No matter how big the universe is, God is bigger.
Amen.
I'll tell you a story. This comes from, I'm a gray-haired baby boom kid, grew up with rock and roll. So if you don't know the references, too bad. But about 10 years ago, I was looking something up on the internet. And I came across an article by a woman named Emma Townsend, who's a gardening columnist for The Independent, or some newspaper in England. And normally she writes about gardening. But in this one, she told the story about when she was growing up. When she was a little girl, she and her father had a wonderful relationship. Very close, and her dad was away on work a lot. But whenever he'd come home, this was the most wonderful thing, and you just, as you hope the daughters and fathers have this great relationship. Then she says she was about 11 years old when she realized, rather than thinking, my dad's a rock star, he's going to come, she found out her dad really was a rock star. Pete Townsend, the lead guitarist for The Who, he was traveling the world, millions of people seeing him. That's the relationship we have with God. We know God first as Abba, Father, our Father, somebody who knows me personally. And then, when we grew up a little bit, we realized that same God is the one who made all of this. And we realized just how incredibly important we are because we have this relationship with the Creator of the universe. And he is so big that he can pay attention to each of us individually as his children. How else could we appreciate how big God was if we didn't have this incredible universe? And one of the bits of work we do here at the Observatory, we were given a collection of meteorites by this fellow and his wife, the Marquis de Maurois and his wife. He was a gentleman scientist in the 19th century, collected most of these samples, and then when he died, they were donated to the Vatican. If you go to a church, you'll sometimes find relics, little bits of bone or a piece of cloth. And those relics remind you that saints were real people, not just stories that we imagine. They really walked the world. These are relics of other planets. These are pieces of outer space that have fallen through the air, come from the asteroid belt, or in some cases from the moon or Mars. And we can actually bring them into our laboratory and measure what happened 4.5 billion years ago when the solar system was being formed. And even dust from stars that are outside our own solar system. We can actually hold them in our hands and measure them. And so one of the bits of work we do here at this observatory, we have a laboratory where we measure their physical properties. And we work with other meteorite scientists We may measure their chemical properties. Are we, recognized? The Vatican sponsored the meeting of the Meteoritical Society here in Rome in 2001. The next president of the Meteoritical Society is, in fact, a Vatican astronomer. Me. So yes, we are deeply involved in science along with the best people around the world. We have here some famous meteorites and where they fell. This one I like in particular. You see the hole in the parking lot. This one fell in a parking lot in Italy, right next to the building where they were building a spacecraft, the Alenia Spazio company. So, a wonderful little irony. And this is a piece of the one that blew up over Chelyabinsk about 10 years ago, Russia. So, we have some famous falls. Here we've got meteorites whose chemistry tells us they're from Mars. These are pieces whose chemistry tells us they're from the moon. That one we know is from the moon because the astronaut picked it up there and brought it back. And then we have all sorts of other meteorites from different kinds. This would be from a stony asteroid that has been shocked black. This is from an iron meteorite, which was probably the core of an asteroid that melted, just as these are pieces of the crust of the asteroid that melted. So by measuring the physical state and the chemical state of these meteorites, we can come up with a bit of a story of what was going on when the solar system was being formed. One of the things that I was taught as a student was that it looks like the solar system was formed out of a cloud of gas and dust, kind of shaped like a frisbee. And, that was all the modelists said that. With the latest telescopes, the ALMA telescope in Chile and then the James Webb, we can see those disks. We can actually measure what's going on inside those disks, something I could not have imagined 50 years ago when I was a student. So who knows what kids today are going to be able to see 50 years from now. Speaking of students, I'll come up here to end the story. We hold a summer school every 2 years with graduate students from around the world. This is all the different places they've come from. And the topic will be some particular issue. This was big data. The summer school that'll be in 2025 is exploring the universe with the James Webb. We've had other schools about water in the universe, about astrobiology, about the formation of galaxies. We have 4 experts will come and speak for a month. They live here for a month. It's free. And it's supported because in America we have a foundation called the Vatican Observatorul Foundation. I hope anybody who hears this, who's got connections in America, go find our website. And we live off donations. So please help us out.